Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Addicts Advocate. I am your host, Dusty Dean, and it is my pleasure to welcome to the show, L.A. Tommy K. How are you, sir?
I'm just doing all right today. 24 hours, shooting for midnight, baby. That's all I
There
got.
we go, day at a time. Day at a
Ain't that
time,
the
right?
truth? Yep.
Ain't that the truth? Well, hey, you and I met through TikTok, and you reached out, and I know that you've got a lot of sobriety under your belt, and from what I understand is you've had a heck of a year. I don't know too much about you personally, and I'm curious to know how you got into the whole sobriety game. What happened there?
Well, that's why I think anniversaries, I'm from the East Coast originally, so we call them anniversaries over there. And I think that's why anniversaries are so critical because they bring at least me back to the moment it happened. And I can tell you, February 5th, 1998, I will never forget that day as long as I live. I had three young kids. I had a nanny, my wife, and the three of us were at this highfalutin hotel in Disney World. And it was probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's asleep all around me. I'm lying on the floor, shaking and baking, and I couldn't stand to be in my own skin. And at that moment, call it the grace of God, call it the gift of desperation, call it sick and tired of being sick and tired, or all three. At the end of the day, the gig was up. I was scared. I didn't know where to turn. I was using alcohol, drugs, cough syrup, you name it, it didn't matter. And, I'll never forget, I got back to Boston, and coincidentally, I had a physical appointment the next day with my physician. And I walked into his office with a bag full of nips, fists, prescription medication, cough syrup, empty bottles, and I just dumped it on the table. And because he had asked how I'm doing, and I said, "This is how I'm doing, right? And I need help." And honestly, he's still my physician. I have never seen him sweat before or since. And to his credit, he knew nothing about addiction, but he got me into, three or four, what do you call it? Recovery centers or sober houses.
Detoxes? Yeah.
Detox. Thank you. And it was really funny because I went around with my wife interviewing these detoxes. Like I'm wearing, back in the day, I'm wearing an Armani 3-piece suit, and I'm
Wow.
interviewing these places to see if it was the right fit. And I got to a place in Worcester, Massachusetts called AdCare. And the guy took one look at me and he said, "You're not going to need that here, buddy." And so it goes, left in your birthday suit, with nothing else around you. That was where I had to face the music. And so started the journey for me. And that was, let's see, 10,042 days ago.
Wow.
And, you keep it in a day. And, like it's crazy because I did it my way. I didn't do it the right way. I didn't do it long enough. I wanted to get out because guess what? I was running a business and they needed me. And, little did I know that they were so glad I was gone, because when I went to work, even though I owned the place, people didn't know which Tom was going to show up. Everybody was on eggshells, and it was just a shit show. And the joke was on me. And I finally didn't go back to work for a couple of weeks, but I got out of rehab or detox, and I was only there for like 7 days. And the one thing that I heard, they obviously, that I didn't know it then, but they had commitments to come in. And this woman spoke, and her life had changed in 1 year's time. And I was so taken back. I came to the meeting the next night where we had the group, and another commitment came in. I said, "Hey, what happened to that lady who was here last night?" It's like, no, 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 it doesn't work that way, and like, but that stuck. And when I got out, I just started going to meetings. And, like in Boston, uh, the meetings when I started going, meetings were at like, 8:30 at night, 8:30 to 10:30, 8:30 to 10 o'clock. So, I would like be home for dinner. My wife, we had 3 young kids, and she would say, just go to your meeting. The house would be a mess. The kitchen would be a mess. And I went. I had great support. That was one of your questions. How did your family kind of deal with you? My kids were, when I got sober, I think my kids were like, I don't know, all 3 of them were under 7 or 8 years old. So maybe it was even younger than that. But like, my wife was incredibly supportive, and I went. And I went to meetings, and I didn't know, how the hell did I get here? And people were holding hands and saying prayers and all these expressions. And, when you first walk into an AA meeting, and AA has been my rock of sobriety, there are other programs, there is other methods. That's my story. And I've gone to AA since day one. And, they all gave me their phone numbers, and it was like, you know this was just, you ask the question, like, how did I get here? You don't understand the language of AA, the expressions, the fellowship. You just don't get it. And, little by slow, one day at a time, I kept going to meetings. And, the thing that stuck for me is I related to the people in Alcoholics Anonymous, because there were people with long-term sobriety. They had families, they had businesses, and it was the rock. And I related to that because I had a business and I had a family. And, despite myself, I still succeeded somewhat. And I actually had a pretty good business, which I'll tell you later on. Things developed in sobriety that was just really traumatic for me. But the one thing in Boston, all the meetings are in church basements. And the one thing that got me was the laughter. I walked down those stairs and the laughter. And it was like, when your shoulders just relax and the air goes out, and it's gonna be okay. And so started the journey. And, relapse just isn't part of my story. And I've been very fortunate to have stuck around and just keep it in a day. So that's the beginnings.
You brought up a lot of good points. A lot of things that I want to touch, circle back on. Definitely, I think there needs to be a time in an addict's life that they get to that scared point, right? I think that's the only way we're going to be successful. Not knowing where to turn and basically throwing yourself at the mercy of whoever will take you in to support you and show you something, give you some hope, give you some light in life. And thankfully, there are those people in this world that do that for us, right? And a lot of them have been in our shoes. So there's definitely an embracing that happens in the sober community that I'm forever grateful for. And one of the things that happens in that process of sitting down in those AA meetings, I find is just that, right? You got to dissolve your ego if you're going to be successful in this, right? You got to be willing to sit here and do the time, right? You've given yourself all this time to destroy yourself. Why don't you give yourself some time every day to rebuild yourself, right? And I think that's where it's at. And so many people, like you said, there are a lot of successful people that suffer with addiction. It is what it is. And so let's move past that. Let's just help rebuilding. And on top of that, one of the things that you had said that really always reminds me is that, when we make this decision to go into rehab, we have to remember this isn't a 30-day event, right? You're in rehab forever, right? I mean, you're not, and so you can't overwhelm yourself with the forever notion, because yes, that will be so absolute and so kind of wrecking to you potentially, especially in the early stages of recovery. That's why we say one day at a time. Okay, at the very least, we know we're going to start with today. I'm not going to drink today. I'm not going to use today. And tomorrow you ask me again, I'll tell you the same, right? Um, and you brought up the point about sacrifices that family make during this whole journey before, when we're completely irrational in our addiction, and then during the recovery process, the sacrifices they have to make in order for us to get well. Without them, that might not make it happen, right? If we don't have those networks of support. And it's interesting because just my last episode, which I just released, we had a nonprofit organization called Miracle Messages on, and they are basically trying to reunify family members that are in homelessness and are in desperate situations with those that they've lost connection with in their life, friends and family. And in just that reunification process, there's healing there. But if you're homeless and you don't have any sort of support network, the best that people are getting right now, unfortunately, is maybe some food and maybe a warm place to stay for the night at times. There's nothing to fall back on. It takes a village to raise, anyone, right? And so we have to get back to this no more dividing and more uniting type of way of thinking and supporting each other in life.
Well, I think especially, and I'm a little familiar with Al Anon. I went a little bit, but, the sponsorship that we have in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, you freely give to someone else what was freely given to us. And it's incredible how, like, a sponsor will give you all the time that you need. And these people are perfect strangers in the beginning. My sponsor today, he's been my sponsor for 27 plus years. And like, he knows me better than my wife. And the reason being is because he knows what makes me tick. He knows how I feel because he feels the exact same way. And he can stand there and I could rant and rave and he could like listen to me and laugh at me. And then I start laughing at myself because he knows. And, I mean, look, I'm married a long time and like I could think my wife hates me in a second. It's like that's in the head. It's that, look, we are certainly addicted to substances, but I have a disease of alcoholism, and that centers in my mind. And I can think that I'm worthless and not as good as you, and inadequate and low self esteem, and on and on and on. And I can't listen to the noise. And that's, one of your question was, I think it was something like, what's the difference between recovery versus sobriety? And at the end of the day, you know, you, I don't know, they have this thing out here called California Sober. And like, I got to tell you something. How can you just be abstinence from substances and not try to change the person who walked in the halls? Because I'm a damaged soul for whatever reason. It didn't make me an alcoholic, but, I do think we are products of our environments. And whatever reason being, my dad died when I was 5 years old. And you lose a father, you lose both parents. I had the luxury of time, which was very destructive for me growing up. So, you get these character defects as you grow older. And, if you aren't willing to do the work and change the person that you brought in the halls, and that's what the steps are designed to do. Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, they're friggin' geniuses of how the steps were created in order for a reason. And, initially my higher power was God, which was a group of drunks. And that's where it started. And I believed in the group, and it took me a long time to believe in a higher power, quote unquote. But, we have to work, I have to work on myself constantly, because I just posted something on TikTok right before our program. And I heard this at a meeting in New York City, and I'll never forget it. The guy said, "You're as sober as you drive." And boy, I'll tell you, it took me a second to get what that meant. But, I could go into a meeting and be all happy and loving and serene. And I could walk out of there and somebody cuts me off and I want to kill the son of a bitch, and it just is that quick, and that's alcoholism. So how do you combat that? How do you change? Certainly after 27 plus years, I don't do it as often. I don't do it as severe, but I'm friggin' human, dude. And, the asshole reappears, especially when I'm not looking for it. The higher power thing, which I choose to call God, I was always looking for God anywhere and everywhere. And where I found a higher power was inside of me. And it's the light and the love and the knowing from right from wrong, and the honesty and the decency that when we were active, when I was active, I had no sense of moral code. I lied, I stole, I cheated. I was just a model human being. And, like as you work the steps and reconnect, you get your conscience back, you get your morality back. And for me, that's a presence of a higher being that, like, intrinsically what's right and what's wrong. You feel it. And before, when you're throwing all that crap in your system, you're void, and that self-centeredness, which is so intrinsic of the disease, that, like, that's what you have to combat. And you could take the substances out and still be a self-centered son of a bitch. And, like, those are the things that I think the steps start to work on as you change and become human again. And that's I think the beauty of being in recovery versus sobriety.
I love it. I love it, and you're spot on. You're spot on, sir. The sober as you drive. That's definitely going to be a clip. I love that saying, because there's so much truth behind it, right? And you're touching on a self-awareness, right? An emotional intelligence can go along with that as well. I always joke with people about this. We are either fortunately or unfortunately blessed or cursed with this reality, because there are people in this world that don't battle alcoholism or addiction in any way, shape, and form, that are that have the tenth of the awareness that we would have in just managing ourselves and how we exist. And there's something to be said for that, because I think there's fruit in that, right? And obviously the steps guide you that direction as well. I am a faithful man myself, and have had wonderful conversations with him inside and outside of addiction. One of the things that has been really profound for me is that, obviously, having suffered addiction for as long as I did, and having the clarity to really true and look at myself, and using therapy as an option as well, to try to just keep on exploring, who I am, why I do the things that I do. And so I take it from all aspects, right? I hit it from all angles as best as I can. I hit it from a psychological way. I hit it from a peer group way, right? I hear it from from the family way, right? And I think that that's part of, again, the maintaining the humility. Um, and because that's the only way that you're going to be able to even remotely get into an AA meeting and think about talking about, what's going on in your life. I did it like the first meeting I was ever at. I literally, and it was crazy because I feel like it was divine intervention, but this was when I was actually physically in detox. I was in a rehab, right? I was in a 30-day inpatient. And during that 30-day inpatient, once we got past our full detox period, we basically started going to AA meetings a couple times a week, and over and above, obviously, all the other counseling and things that we were getting. And I was sitting basically at the back pew, not to hide, but it was a fairly large church, and I'm a fairly large man. So it was just kind of, had some room. I had a couple of other buddies that were obviously in therapy with me, in rehab with me. And we're sitting back there, and I did not know, but this was kind of going to be an open mic kind of night. And if nobody opens up their mouths, I'm actually going to start by picking people. And lo and behold, the moderator for the night, who goes all the way to the very back, you in the blue shirt. I'm like, all right, let's do this. I mean, obviously I don't have a problem with talking because I can do this now, but it was something that I felt was liberating because I wanted to, in a weird way, I wanted to feel that love from the group, right? I wanted to see the heads nodding from the things that I was struggling with. I needed that reassurance from people I wasn't interfacing with on a regular basis in rehab that I knew obviously were obviously either physically going through detox themselves or were counselors, and a lot of them obviously had been through it as well. But that was fruitful because it gave me, I recognized that I have an army of people that I had no idea existed that understood exactly what I was going through. Because addiction's isolating, right? Alcoholism's isolating. Those things are isolating. And so we don't think anybody understands and experiences the things that we do. And so when we drop that guard from recognizing that, no, there are others like that, right? You get to actually open yourself up more and explore yourself more, right? You're willing to go that extra mile because I think that there's nothing in your way to stop you from continuing to gain fruit in this life in that way. And I think that, they say that the greatest thing an individual can do in this life is not change the world, but change themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's fruit in that. I think that our life, my faith teaches me that our life has been nothing but a constant whittling away to the heart and the soul of the matter, right? And we get constantly bombarded with environmental impacts, obviously upbringing impacts, all these things weigh and shape and mold the way that we view this world and how we respond to it. And now it's like, you know what? You get to take the blinders off and face it full force.
No question about it.
Right. There's totally fruit in that. Yeah, I do sometimes I find it taxing for myself that I feel like I hyperthink about a lot of this stuff. I know it's just the nature of who I am. But it's frustrating because I feel like people have more peaceful lives that don't have to operate at this level. What is your thought on that?
Well, I mean, my only sponsor said to me in the very beginning, it's a do program, not a think program. And,
right.
It's like, it's action. And, I always use the expression, like anytime I'll post, I'll always say, be where your feet are, because I'm watching your feet. I'm watching what you do, not what you say,
Right.
and, they have a term out here in California, which I thought was fabulous that I learned out here was contrary action. And if I'm thinking one thing, probably isn't the right decision at the time because, my immediate reaction impulse is probably based on fear or selfish motives or something that isn't the perspective that I really should be taking a look at. So the contrary action is, to do nothing. And, I think that, and that's where the steps come in, where, that it gives you the ability to, come to believe, right? And then be able to turn your will and your life over. And that doesn't really mean, I hate when people say, turn your will and your life over to the care of God. What the hell does that mean? Well, it really means my thinking and acting. All right. That's what it really means. And it's like, my first thought probably isn't the best one. And I learned over time, look, the 10 step teaches us, restraint of pen, tongue, text, and email. And I created a HALT folder on my email. And if I rifle off something that I'm like all pissed off, I'll send it to that folder and I won't send it to the person. And like those are things that I learned in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And, the people before me, kind of taught me and showed me the way. And that's where I think that it's like, that's where I think it's more like a do program than a think program, because I watch how you act, and not so much, like, I don't know, you touched on some things about, people nodding their heads. We're human being. We need connection. And, you know, at the end of the day, don't we all just want to be loved? I
Right.
mean, who doesn't want an attaboy? That's where service,
Mm.
helping not only another alcoholic, but anybody, uh, like makes me feel good to help somebody else. And it does two things. It gets me out of myself and I forget about my own shit, and it helping somebody else. And that's the beauty of it. Have you ever noticed just holding the door open for somebody, just random acts of kindness? you know there's so much unrest and trouble in the world today, and like, if we all just do our part, just to be nice to somebody else for 1 minute, and that's where I think Alcoholics Anonymous, really, there should be a program for straight people, because it gets us out of ourself and it allows us a different perspective, to be tolerant and patient. I was at a meeting once, and I this one guy took over the meeting, and he had ragtime for 12 minutes and I was counting. And it was like the guy just went off, and he really took the meeting by, like, kidnapped the meeting. And after the meeting, and then he left. After he shared, he left. Son of a gun. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we kind of talked to each other and said, well, what was the message? What was our higher power trying to teach us by this guy ranting and raving? And it was patience and tolerance. So it wasn't what he was doing to me. What was he doing for me? And we can turn things around at any
Change the
moment.
narrative.
That, no question about it. And like, I think we learn that. I think we learn that in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I think the beauty. Back on the East Coast, they have these things called an AWOL. An AWOL stands for a way of living or a way of life, and it's an intensive study of the 12 steps. It's not sanctioned by AA because there's rules and commitments, but it's 7 months long. We use the big book and the 12 and 12 and other literature, and it's a major commitment. But there's the discussions of, like, working on different steps. You have different people with different lengths of sobriety, and it just allows you to get better. And it allows you to look at things from a different perspective. I've done one every year for the last 26 years. I do the steps alcoholically, unfortunately, or fortunately. But the only time I missed is I had a liver transplant as a result of this disease. 13 years ago. And I was in the hospital for 45 days, and it was kind of tough to facilitate an AWOL back then. But they're just that's where you get the growth.
Love it. You touched again on a lot of things here. You were talking about obviously some things were traumatic for you earlier on, just obviously in recovery that you were managing. Obviously, the liver transplant was the big one for you.
That was one of them. In sobriety, I had a really great business. I lost the business. My wife had cancer twice. I had a liver transplant. I got uh, um, depressed, like physically depressed. And all these things, you hear around the program, you get sober and your life gets better. You know, you get sober and sometimes your life gets worse. But I got better able to deal with the things that were dealt with me through the fellowship. I could go to meetings and spill my guts and cry so I could be strong for my wife. And I didn't have to cry in front of her. And I was able to get through the loss of my business. And I was able to get through depression. And how do you get through depression? I talked about contrary action. I went to meetings and more meetings and different meetings, and I started sharing, and I got therapy. I went for outside help because sometimes AA just isn't enough. But how do you walk through that with the help of the fellowship, of a higher power, and of doing action, right? I can sit there and swallow in my own shit and be the star of my own pity potty, or I could do something about it. And little by little, things started to get better. And, I think I'll never forget, I was 18 years sober. And whatever it was, the urge came over me to drink like I had never had before. And it was like I got my butt to a meeting, and I knew people in the meeting, and I was the last one to share about it. And I shared how my ass was on fire. And not one person came up to me after the meeting for help. So then it becomes between you and your higher power. And that was the only thing that kept me away from a drink at that moment. But we get through these things because we learn how not to feed the animal with alcohol and drugs. We learn to face the music and walk through our fear. What does fear stand for? You can, what is it? Face everything
False
and
expectation.
recover, or fuck everything and run, so yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I
Yeah.
hope I answered your question.
Oh yeah, no, good stuff. The service to others thing, I think, is such a critical thing. I think that people don't realize that you're not going to get into a 30-day, rehab, and then your life is done and over with, and you go back to the way it was. There is a change that takes place, and the only way that change takes place is by staying in it, and you got to be in it to win it. That's obviously why I do this here. I recognized that roughly 4 or 5 months after I got out of rehab. I was in an IOP, then an intensive outpatient program for a good 3 months. And I was like, the only way this is going to happen is if I just stay doing this, because I came home from the 30-day detox and I felt just so raw and so scared. And I was like, I need to get myself into something else because I don't know how to exist yet in the outside world. Because I had stopped a couple of times of drinking, and there was a couple 6-year stints. And the biggest thing that I recognized, because I had never actually physically gone and went and sought help for those, I just did quit, was that I got complacent, right? And complacency in this disease is the biggest thing that's going to get you back. And you hear about it, unfortunately, right? 15, 20 years sober, boom, they're back at day 1, day 20. And not to say that you can't undo the growth, but obviously it is definitely even a bigger ego hit at that point. And the biggest thing is that hoping that the relapse is minimal, if there is one, and that you get back on board as quickly as you can. Um,
Just one little comment on that.
go
Uh,
for it.
I've been going to Martha, our family's been going to Martha's Vineyard for the last 35 years. And I always go to this one meeting there. And one summer, uh, or maybe the year before, this guy had 30 years. And then I came back the following year, and the guy was just coming back. And I was so like brokenhearted. It's like, how could
Right.
you have 30 years? 30 years is a freaking lifetime. And you know what? And so I asked him, and he said, I stopped going to meetings.
Yeah.
Simple as that,
Right.
and then, it's really a disease of the mind, and it'll tell you that you're okay and you can just have one. And that's really the size of my problem right there. All right. Because, you know, what's that expression? One's too many and a thousand's never enough. And it's so true because I have an allergy, and that phenomenon of craving takes over, and I'm different than you. And
Yeah.
one of your questions was, do I think this thing is a disease? Yes, I think this is, the medical. When I had my liver transplant, I went to school after, I was healthy enough to go to school because I couldn't work for like 3 or 4 years. So I went to school and I studied to be a drug addiction counselor. And I never practiced, but I learned so much about the clinical side. And my God, what we do to ourselves, yes, it is a disease model. And the medical community recognizes that. And we are built different, like, than the normies. You know, Somebody who does not have an alcoholic mind, they can have one and leave it. I look at that and go, what, are you crazy? And any alcoholic will look at you and laugh. It's like, I don't get that. And that's the difference between, crossing that line of being an alcoholic or not. And I think those who are alcoholic, have an alcoholic mind, they can't control their alcohol. They can't control their intake, whether it's, I'm addicted to more. Did you ever have one lifesaver? I mean, could you have just one potato chip? I mean, try Oreo cookies. Like, forget, I'll eat the whole tub of ice cream, but I'm not going to get addicted to ice cream. I'm not going to get sick on ice cream. So what the hell? We all need our vices.
Yeah. No, it's I hear you. I'm the same way. I'd be racing for my wife to finish her one glass of wine at dinner after I've already punched down two old fashions, waiting for her to I'm ready for her just to say leave it, even though I think it's sacrilegious, just because I need to get my ass to the liquor store so I can continue drinking, you know. So yeah, it's you know how it goes. But yeah, and I'd sit there and I go, "You nuts? What is the matter with you?" Yeah, I know you drink to get drunk. That's you drink to feel
Right.
something,
And we
right?
can laugh
That's
at each other, right? Because
yeah,
we know,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. It's funny. I mean, it's just
it is.
it, yeah, and yeah, and I do the same thing with my sober group too. I have a great through my IOP, I was able to actually have an additional sober group that I meet every week. And yeah, and we're just so candid with each other and just hearing, and everybody's got just it's a myriad of different types of things that we struggle with, and it's great because we're all learning off of each other, and that's the thing that's just so much fruit because these friendships are real. These friendships are
Mm.
true. They're strong. They're not centered around Friday night drinking, Saturday night drinking and partying. They're not, they're not centered around what are we doing to obliterate ourselves or just we have to go somewhere and have fun. And it's like, can we just sit and have a conversation and have it be meaningful and impactful and feel fruitful? I mean, it's a rare thing nowadays.
Well, you brought up such a great point, especially men don't talk. It's like, how's the game? It's all sports related. It's just, and in AA or any other 12-step program, we get into how we feel. We get into honest things that, like, I could relate to you. And I think that's a beautiful quality where we can listen. There is no place on earth that I've ever been involved in versus AA, where if somebody says some stuff that's going on in their life, I'll bet you somebody comes up to you a couple weeks later and says to you, hey, how's that thing going on? Because we listen and we remember. People on the street, normies that, like, do they really care? When I had my liver transplant, you think you have really close friends, and it surprises you who shows up when things are really tough. And it surprises you of the people who you didn't think were there for you who do show up. So it's a double-edged sword for sure. And
Yeah.
you find that out the hard way. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, people show up for you and they care and they listen.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. That's why this thing's been successful for as long as it has been. And obviously you have different types of systems that are modeling off of it and are trying to spin off and do their own thing that are all fruitful as well. And to me, it's like when I was in rehab, the education that I got just from those 30 days was enough for me to sit there and go, this is all good information. How come people don't understand this about this disease? How come people don't recognize it? And that's one of the things that obviously prompted me too. I'm like, I didn't want to put this information out in the world in another way. Let's spam the world with the good news, and because there's hope still. This doesn't need to be a death sentence, right? It doesn't need to be a
No.
death sentence.
And you asked one of your question was something about willpower.
Oh, is it self-control or is it willpower? Yeah.
How has self-will affected your sobriety?
Yeah.
And I think that it's got nothing to do with self-will. It's got everything to do with giving up, surrender to win. And I can use willpower in the right way where it's aligned with what God's will is for me. That's what I have to work on because I made a mess, right? My willpower got me sitting right here, right? And how'd that work out for me? So
Right.
I don't even think willpower, is the key to sobriety. I think I have to give up my willpower and, just turn it over because I'm just not that powerful, and like your higher power could be the ocean, you know? So, I went to Yosemite, I think it was last summer, and just look at nature. You got this incredible environment, and we're just like a little speck, like just related to that.
Right.
I'm like a speck of microdust on a cow's ass. I'm nothing compared to like the world that we live in. So how powerful am I really? Can I move an oak tree? I don't think so. You know, but the power. I'll give you a great example. My son's best friend, who lives in Dallas, from Boston, moved to Dallas. I'm from Boston. I moved to California. This kid went off the friggin' rails. And my son gave him my number. And I knew him from growing up, and they went to high school together and all that crap. And the kid reached out to me. And you talk about a higher power. This kid's in Dallas. I'm in LA. And I put out text messages to my network in Boston and my network in LA. And somebody who I helped get sober 5 years ago wound up moving to Dallas 3
Love it.
minutes from the guy's house. You
Love it.
call that God or you call that odd? And
Right.
I think those miracles happen, you know, in our program. And that's what, that's what we should have we should have a marquee out front of every meeting that says miracles happen here. And that's what it is. And I think that that's where I believe that there's something bigger than me. There's something bigger than us at work here. Because how does that stuff happen? We could all say it's a coincidence, but is it really?
Right. Right.
So
good stuff. I always tell people, right? I mean, when we're in addiction, we're kind of have our blinders on, right? We're so like absorbed and withdrawn and pulled in. But as soon as we get into sobriety, all of a sudden our masks are off. We're outside. We're actually looking out now. We're kind of taking ourselves out of the picture and just kind of starting to be in awe with everything. There's clarity in what we're doing here, and that provides fruit that you really, the best thing you can tell someone is that you got to experience it. You got to experience. You got to be willing to give yourself that leap of faith to get sober, to quit drinking, quit using, whatever it may be, and you're going to find, and be patient with yourself and give it time. But over the course of just a simple period of time, right? And again, it's not to say, like you were saying earlier, that life gets easier, but it definitely can feel more raw at times. But
life
at the very
lifey,
least,
man.
It is what it is. I really liked what you said, getting back to this whole self-will thing. And the reason why I posed this question is that I think generationally, we have to be concerned about the mode of conversation that happens to us, where it's basically just, well, how come you're not strong enough just to manage yourself? How come you just can't manage yourself? Shouldn't you just be stronger than that? How come you just can't control yourself? Just one or two drinks, right? You should be able to control yourself, right? You should be able to manage yourself. What's wrong with you? So all of a sudden now you just, you're getting beat up. You feel like a failure, and somebody's basically just calling you out on, again, in a sense, it could feel like, my willpower, right? Don't you have the will to refrain yourself from drinking after one or two?
No.
And so
I mean, it says it in the big book, right?
Right.
Oh, isn't she such a nice girl? Don't you think he'd want to quit for her?
Right.
No, it doesn't matter. And that's where the alcoholism centers in the mind, because I don't have the willpower. I'm not strong enough. I can't do it because I will give in. My most natural state is to pick up a drug or a drink. That feels the most normal to me, because that's what I learned at a young age, to run and hide and stuff it and drink it away. When the kids were picking on me, I got fucked up. When things didn't go my way, I got screwed up, and on and on, and that's how I learned to deal with things. So this is abnormal. It's not natural. And that's where I think, that the willpower goes right out the window, because no, I can't do it for her. I can't even do it for me, because I'm not that powerful. That's why I need the help from someone else. And I do think that we learn by example. I learned from you. I learned from people in the program. I learned from my sponsor that I can't touch it. I can't do it in safety, because it's just like poison. And, how many people, unfortunately, I've known people who have died from this disease, sponsees. They just couldn't leave it alone, and then they took that one fatal shot in their arm, and that was it, gone. So no, I don't want to risk it.
Yeah. With the amount of sobriety that you have, are you coming across, still triggers of any sort, or is there anything peculiar that brings it up to you? I mean, obviously you talked about that one situation that you had where it was very strong for you that day, but anything that probably obviously more capable of deflecting things now, right? But what bothers you? What gets you in the mood and makes you reminisce about it or think about it at all?
Well, I think it's, that happens more often than not. And you
Right.
know what happens? What happens is that I don't get that piece of business, or I don't get
Mm.
my way, or I fail, or I suck at tennis, or I suck at golf. And all those things make me feel like less than, worthless. And those are triggers of, not that I'm going to pick up a drink, but they're triggers of the feelings of, like, they get me down and I start feeling bad. And it's all about me. So those are things that I have to constantly watch out for, because it can easily multiply. And when I let them continue to fester, a drink starts to look pretty good. You can get a bad diagnosis health wise. And, sometimes I could say, is it all worth it? You know, and like, we get down. And so the best remedy for those types of triggers for me, find somebody to help, plain and simple. Go find another alcoholic and help them and get me out of me. And all of a sudden, I'm feeling okay again. And you had a great question here, and that
Go for it.
was, what are the three biggest mistakes that one would lead someone to relapse? Well, I think the first thing is, I think meeting makers make it. You know, I'm 27 plus years sober. I go to meetings at least 5 times a week. And guess what I don't do? I'm not on my phone, right? I can't give up an hour. Is my social media, my email, my texting more important than listening to that speaker who might say one thing that'll rock my soul and keep me sober that day? All right. I go to meetings and I'm on the edge of my seat because I want to hear what you have to say. So I think, you know, that's really one of them. And number two is Rule 62. Don't take yourself too seriously. All right. Because my shit stinks too. And once I get my, think I'm like Mr. AA or Mr. Sober, that's when I'm in trouble. And remain teachable, right? I do the steps every year because guess what? There's something I'm going to read that all of a sudden it's in bold letters. And it took me, that expression, being rocketed into the fourth dimension? I never knew what that felt like until 25 years of sobriety. And then I felt it through and through, and I was rocketed into the fourth dimension. But guess what? I'm right back on planet Earth again, right? I lose it as quickly as I gain it, but I know how to get it. I know how to get it back. And it took me 26 years to find God. So remain teachable. I don't got this thing. It's got me. And, that to me are the three big mistakes that one can make. You know, keep it green. You know what one of my favorite things is when I go to a meeting and I see somebody who's just out of rehab. They have 2 days and their face is all red and their knees are flopping like the wind. And it's like, thank you for reminding me that I never have to go back there. And those are the things that I'm
Yeah.
very, very aware of. But if I'm on my phone, I'm missing that. Leave your phone in the car. AA, I
Right.
think you're right. I mean, are you
Right.
that
Yeah.
important for Christ's
Makes no
friggin'
sense. Yeah.
sakes? Like,
Yeah.
that's where I think AA has changed. Like the old timers when I first came in, hey, first of all, there was smoking meetings back then, and get a job, right? Clean the friggin' ashtrays for Christ's sakes. It was take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth and sit in the front row and listen and keep your mouth shut. And like I think that we have lost respect for our elders in this new generation of Alcoholics Anonymous. Too much social media, too much being on the phone. You know what? I ain't going to AA to make friends, right? I'm going there to save my ass. And this is like, this is Russian roulette, dude. I'm not fooling around with this stuff at all. So I don't give a shit who likes me or who doesn't, right? I want to go there because I'm trying to stay sober one day at a time.
That's it. That's it. I mean, we have to constantly go back to that day, that sober day. Why did you get there? How did you get there? I always tell people, if addiction could show you what it did at the beginning, what it shows you at the end, like shit, there'd be no addicts in the world, right?
Great point. Great
Right.
point. Let me see if
But you
I.
got to remember that first day. You got to remember that first day. I've got one for you, just
Okay.
because
I'm
I
all. I'm
want to know
all.
with all these years, independent of your recovery, what are you doing for you? How do you feel like your life is enriched personally in hobbies and education and knowledge and growth and relationships? Give that to me.
You know, um, I think that I don't take anything for granted. Um, Look, I used to play ice hockey in college, and drugs and alcohol took that away from me. When I got um, when I got sober, I started doing the things that I did when I was a young kid. I played golf, I played tennis. I had to give up playing ice hockey because I've had 4 back surgeries, and the last one the doctor said, "Hey, you want to play golf and tennis? You better give up ice hockey." But like I'm present, and I think the sobriety has given me the perspective, to like not take things for granted and to be where my feet are, enjoy the moment. My kids, they'll look up at the sky, right? And they'll say, "Dad, look at that beautiful sky. Look at that sunset. Look at that sunrise. Listen to the birds, be present." And I think that's what the clarity of being alive. Because you know what, my first cousin lived in Santa Rosa, went out for a bike ride, got hit by a car, and he's dead, right? Just like that. So like, you know like be be present, because it could go in 1 second. So I think that the clarity of not taking things for granted and living life to its fullest every day. Every day is an opportunity to like do something good for somebody else, because doing something good for someone else makes me feel good, and it allows me to like just um you know be happy with myself. And today I like to say 2 things today. I am the president of the Just Good Enough Club, and that's okay for me. And I want to be boring and predictable. I don't need to be too high, I don't need to be too low. Just a nice balance, one day at a time. And, you know, that's, that's where all those years of sobriety, that, and my wife will let me know when I'm being an asshole, real quick,
There
real
you go.
simple. You do the ninth step, right? I do, like I was telling you, I do these AWOLs every year. And the ninth step comes up, and I'll ask her, uh, every year, what can I do better? And every year, she's got a long list, long list. The last few years, she hasn't had anything for me to do. So, it's progress, not perfection. I hope I answered your
Love it.
question.
Oh yes, yes. It's funny because before you actually said the word, I wrote it down, presence. Because yeah, that has so much gold in it right there. Because you get to experience life, and what comes with the presence comes the gratitude. Um, One of the things that I find very important in my life that I wanted to get your opinion on was that I very much find that if I get out of balance in any way, shape, and form, like maybe I'm working a little bit too much, maybe I'm not working out at the gym enough lately. Maybe the schedule's been hectic to the point where I just feel like I can't catch my breath. And so I'm very, very sensitive to that now, just as much as I'm sensitive to what's going on inside of here. So I value that. I very much safeguard it. I protect it. And everybody that's in my life that's significant understands that too. On the flip side, I do at times get recovery fatigue. And getting fatigue and recovery just from the immersion of it, whether I'm doing a recording or I'm editing or I basically I'm in my meetings, but sometimes I get just a little tired, I guess, and so have you ever experienced that at all?
Never.
Never.
I honestly never am tired of like anything to do with my recovery, because I'm always working towards staying in recovery. And I
Yeah.
work with other alcoholics. I work in the behavioral health field. Clients that I work with, they know that I go to a meeting every morning, and like it's okay, I'll talk about it, but I'm immersed in it as you are. And it's just like, um no, I don't I don't I don't I mean, no, I don't get fatigued, because and especially when I do these AWOLs, and I do them every year, that invigorates me to such a degree that, like, that's why I do them every year. And like, I know for the 5 months of the year, there's 7 months. There's 7 months of the year we're in this AWOL thing, and the other 5 months, I won't pick up a big book. I won't pick up a big book at all. But I'll go to meetings, but I'm not working the big book like I do in an AWOL.
Got it.
And I guess to that point, is that like,
That's your balance,
getting
right? Maybe
tired?
that's your
Yeah,
balance. Maybe that's your
but
balance a little
like,
bit. And so you avoid a recovery fatigue maybe, because obviously you sustain that for 12 months out of the year would be probably pretty tough, right? Or, even maybe,
I don't know. I miss it
do you?
when we finish the AWOL, immediately we'll start a step meeting, and we'll go over the one step and have a discussion every week. So I chase it. I chase it like, like my first, I chase it like I was chasing a drink, honestly. And in 27 years, I have not gotten tired of it at all.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. And I guess I don't know if it's because I've talked with my sober group, because I do have a counselor that's in there as well for our group. And I think maybe sometimes it's the in depth of the conversation sometimes. And it's just and maybe, it's not so much as just simply needing to, I need to take a step back for a period of, of weeks. It's maybe just, today's maybe not the day that I'm going to a meeting, because I'm just maybe, maybe the body's talking to you a little bit more, right? Maybe you're a little bit run down. Maybe work was a little bit more heavy for you. And maybe that's kind of how you know, because I find that if I don't have that right balance in my life and I don't get enough rest, right, if I don't get my nutrition properly, if I don't see my kids, if I don't have those balance and those things, uh, I start to go haywire, right? So that's kind of my take on it.
What gets me off Jag is stress.
Right?
Stress will take me off of my game in a
Yeah.
heartbeat.
Right.
And, that's what I have to watch out for, because,
Yeah.
I'm under a deadline and, or I'm late and I don't take too kindly to that. So,
Right.
work in progress, right? I mean, I got to work on
Yeah.
those things because, I mean, it does turn me into a gremlin. There's no question about that.
Yeah. For sure. For sure. Let me see here. How would you love someone who was struggling with addiction? Somebody that was really close in your life.
Continue to love them, not judge them, understand that they have a disease, that um, they might do things that are harmful. And I don't like what they are, but I also, have to say, I really kind of take that, off of like page 62 of the big book, they're a sick person too. They're spiritually sick. You wouldn't treat a person who has cancer that way. So, I try to uh, you know, like forgive them and know that it's the disease. And, and I've had friendships um, ruined because, they've done things. But, I'm always going to welcome them back when they're ready and not judge them and hold a grudge. So I have to try to always remember. I have a good friend of mine. We were really close friends for 3 years, and this person was an alcoholic through and through. And, at one point, we just kind of went our separate ways. And that hurt a lot. They need to go to a meeting. I'll be the first one to take them. But I
Yeah.
think I have to separate the fact that it's the disease,
Yeah.
not the person. And I really try to keep that in check.
And that's the one thing I think, unfortunately, right, with normies, right, they don't get that aspect of it. And so there's an inherent conflict with it.
Yeah, and are we still, am I still judgmental? Yeah, somewhat, you know. But I think where, the difference between sobriety and recovery is that's an awareness and that's something I need to do better on and work on it. And I think if I'm just sober, I'm not thinking of those things, right? And I'm just thinking of me.
So, final parting gems of wisdom that you have for us. You got anything other than what we know?
You know what? Keep it simple.
Right.
It's a do program, not a think program.
Love it.
It's what we do in our action. I think that never take it for granted, remain teachable, and that I'm not too powerful, and I could, hey, it's just an isosceles triangle, right? It's just that easy, right? So, just keep it fresh, keep it green, keep helping other people. That to me is the biggest thing in the program is help another alcoholic. And remember that, I ain't God, period.
We've got to go through those stages of change, right? And what you're saying tonight is just so reminiscent. My dad, when I was growing up, used to say, "Hey, you know what? I hear what you're saying, he goes, but I'm going to watch what you do, and let's see if there's a correlation there. How's that sound?"
That's lucky. That's a pearl. That's a
That
pearl of
and
wisdom.
yeah, and I still have to listen to that voice, right? We still do. I mean, because we're all fallible, right? And so it is what it is. But Tommy,
But
this
we're
has
all
been great.
broken.
What's that?
We are all broken.
Yes.
And it is our brokenness
Right.
that binds us together.
Right.
Right? Because it's that compassion of understanding our brokenness that we all just want to be loved.
Right.
And you know what? I'm no better than you, and you're no better than me. And it's just like, it's just an even keel. And, you know,
I
one day
agree,
at a
brother.
time.
Amen. It's we're here for each other, right? That's why we're here, and so let's figure it out. I mean, because the reality of it is that if history shows us anything, the only thing that changes is technology. We do the same shit to each other throughout millennia, throughout history. It's in the books. We have these things within us that would just makes us who we are. So like I said earlier, right? This isn't about division anymore. This is about uniting. This is about getting people to have more compassion, understand, empathy. It's such a need. The pendulum's been constantly swinging, in different directions, and it's time to put it back where it needs to be. And so we all have this army now, right? We're all this collective army and this voice that helps each other in that regard, right? And slowly spreads it throughout the world.
From your mouth to God's ears.
There we go, brother. Hey, you know
Hey,
what? God bless you. I
thank you.
appreciate your time tonight. LA Tommy K with TikTok, bud. I'm going to get you out there and let the whole world know your story and hear the wonderful things and point them to your channel and continued success in your sobriety. And you know what? Maybe in 6 months to a year, we'll do a check-in. How's that sound?
Love that.
Awesome, brother.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
God bless you, bud. Take care.